Chapter 1. Reassessing Consumption in Maturity. Oh, my dear ones, let me tell you how important it was for me to rethink the way I dealt with shopping and consumption as I got older. You know, when I was young, back in the 60s, we lived in a time when having a new TV or a new car was synonymous with success. I remember as if it were yesterday when I bought my first color TV. I thought that was the height of happiness. But I'll tell you something. The more time passed, the more I realized that the joy of a new purchase was fleeting. It's like that tasty cup of coffee. It gives pleasure at the moment, but it soon passes. What really stays are other things. For example, the other day I was organizing some old photographs with my granddaughter. You know, I didn't even remember that color TV I was so proud of anymore. But the photos of family outings, oh, those made me cry with emotion. The memories of fishing trips with my father, Sunday lunches with the whole family gathered, that's priceless. Nowadays, when I see all this Black Friday advertising on TV, cyber this and that, I think, how long will a person have to work to pay for all this? And is it really worth it? Not that I think it's wrong to buy things, that's not it. But it's like my grandmother always said, the cheap can sometimes be expensive, and not just in money, but in lifetime too. I have a neighbor, Mrs. Sarah, who's always buying things online. The other day she showed me her wardrobe. She has clothes that still have tags on them, bought over a year ago. I was thinking that with the money from all those clothes, she could have taken that trip she always dreamed of to visit her daughter who lives far away. You know what I learned? That true wealth is in the stories we can tell, not in the things we can show. When I get together with my friends for Thursday Dominoes, nobody cares about the model of my cell phone or if my clothes are branded. What matters is the hearty laugh, the good conversation, that coffee with homemade cookies. And I'll tell you, since I started thinking this way, my life has become lighter. My retirement income goes further, my house has less junk to clean, and the best part, I have more time and money to do what really makes me happy, like taking my grandchildren for ice cream on Sunday or making that special lunch when my children visit. So, my advice to you is, don't fall for this talk that you need to buy more and more to be happy. True happiness is in the little things, in the hugs, in the laughter, in the time well spent with those we love. Chapter 2. Detachment as a Path to Freedom. Oh, my dears, let me tell you about one of the most important lessons I learned after 70, the power of detachment. You know that drawer everyone has at home full of things that you might need someday? Well, I had a whole room like that. I remember as if it were yesterday when my daughter came and said, "Dad, let's organize your things." At first, I confess I was resistant. Each object had a story, a memory. I had even kept my grandson's first little shoe. He's already 25 years old, imagine that. I'll tell you a story that changed my way of thinking. I had an old clock of my father's, stored for years in a box. It was broken, but I couldn't part with it because it reminded me of him. One day, talking to my grandson, I realized I was keeping the clock, but I wasn't even telling him stories about my father. What was the point of keeping the object if the memories were locked away with it? So I started slowly. First it was the old magazines. "But Grandpa, everything's on the internet today," my granddaughter would say. Then those clothes that didn't fit anymore, I donated them to the nursing home nearby. You can't imagine the joy I felt when I saw Mr. Joseph, one of the residents, wearing my old jacket and all happy. The hardest part was going through my late wife's things. Each piece of clothing, each piece of jewelry had a story of us together. But you know what I discovered? That the memories weren't in the things, they were in my heart. I set aside some special pieces for the granddaughters, made an album with the most important photos, and donated the rest. It was like taking a weight off my shoulders. And look how interesting. The more I got rid of things, the lighter I felt. My house became easier to clean, I find everything more easily, and the best part, now I have space to comfortably welcome my family. Before, we could hardly sit on the couch because of so many things. There's also that story about my cup collection. I had more than 50, all stored in a china cabinet gathering dust. One day I decided to keep only the 10 most special ones and gave the others to people who would really use them. Now, every Sunday, when I have coffee with my friends, each one uses a different cup, and we reminisce about stories. A funny thing I noticed is that the fewer things I have, the more value I give to each of them. That photo frame I got for Father's Day, the family photo album, the favorite armchair in my reading corner, each thing has its place and its meaning. And you know what else? I discovered that letting go isn't losing, it's gaining. I gained space, time. I don't need to spend time looking for things anymore, peace of mind and even money, because I stopped buying things just to store them. Now, when I want to give someone a gift, I prefer to give attention, time, a special lunch, an outing together. As my granddaughter says, "Grandpa, minimalism is chic." I don't know if it's chic, but I know it's liberating. It's like taking a huge weight off your back and heart. And you know what's most beautiful? Seeing that the things I donated are making other people happy, being truly useful. Want to know if you should start detaching too? Start slowly, choose a drawer, a shelf. Take each object and ask yourself, does this bring me joy? Have I used it in recent years? Could someone else make better use of it? You'll see how liberating it is. Chapter 3. Capitalism with Conscience. Oh my dears, let me share with you a reflection I made after so many years living in this fast-paced world. You know, I was born in a very different time when we fixed things instead of throwing them away. My father was a shoemaker, and you should have seen how he made a shoe last. I remember as if it were yesterday when the first department store arrived in our town, back in the 60s. It was a celebration. Everyone wanted to buy the novelties. I myself, I confess, was dazzled. I bought a nylon shirt. It was the latest fashion. But you know what happened? On the first hot day, I nearly melted from the heat. My cotton shirt made by my mother was much cooler. The other day, I was talking to my grandson about his cell phone. "Grandpa, I need to change it. It's already 2 years old," he said. Then I showed him my wristwatch, which I got from my father when I turned 18. More than 50 years have passed, and it still works perfectly. We laughed together when he realized his old 2-year-old cell phone was still great. Not that I'm against progress, far from it. Thanks to that same cell phone, I can video call my daughter who lives in another state. It's wonderful. The problem is when we become slaves to novelties. As my grandmother used to say, all that glitters is not gold. For example, there's that story about my neighbor, Mrs. Betty. Every month she buys a new pan because she saw it on TV. She already has a cabinet full, but she keeps buying. The other day she confessed to me that she's in debt because of these purchases. You know what I told her? "Mrs. Betty, the best pan is the one you use." One thing I've learned from life is that you can enjoy the good that progress brings without being held hostage by it. For example, I use a banking app on my cell phone. It's very practical. But I keep my little expense notebook because it works for me. I buy online when it's worth it, but I still frequent the neighborhood fair where I talk to everyone and know where what I'm buying comes from. The secret, in my opinion, is to use your head before using your card. When I'm going to buy something, I always ask myself, do I really need this? Will it truly improve my life? If the answer is no, I save the money for something that really matters. Like that trip I took with my grandchildren last year. The photos and memories of those days are worth much more than any new gadget. And there's more. I realize that the more we buy, the more we want to buy. It's like a thirst that never passes. But when we stop to think about what really matters, then things change. In the end, what makes me happiest isn't the things I have, but the moments I live. A funny story. My granddaughter really wanted an expensive brand-name sneaker. Instead of buying it, I suggested she save her allowance for a few months. You know what happened? Halfway through, she discovered a photography course and changed her mind. Today, she has a small photo business and is much happier than she would be with the sneakers. Capitalism isn't bad in itself. It has brought us many good things. The problem is when we let it rule our lives. As that saying goes, money is a good servant, but a terrible master. We need to be smart. Use what serves us, leave aside what we don't need, and always remember that life is much more than buying things. Chapter 4. Living simply in a fast-paced world. My friends, today I want to talk about something I learned after running around a lot in life. The beauty of living slowly. You know, when I was younger, I was always in a rush. I woke up at 5 in the morning, took 2 buses to work, came back late. I thought that was living well, being successful. I remember a day, about 15 years ago, when I had a high blood pressure scare. The doctor looked me straight in the eye and said, "Mr. Jack, you need to slow down." At first I was worried. What do you mean slow down? I have so much to do. But you know, that scare was a blessing in disguise. I started paying attention to how my neighbor, Mr. Frank, lived. Every day at 6 in the morning, he was in the yard watering the plants, talking to the birds. At first I thought he was wasting time. Today I do the same, and I discovered that wasted time is the most precious of my day. I'll tell you something funny. I had an alarm clock that woke me up every day. It was so noisy. Now, I wake up to the song of the birds that have nested in my guava tree. My granddaughter says this is mindfulness, these modern words they invent. To me, it's just living, paying attention to the beautiful things in life. One of the biggest changes was at lunch. Before I ate in a hurry, sometimes I didn't even chew properly. Today, I make a point of sitting at the table even when I'm alone. I put out a nice plate, a flower in the center of the table, and I eat slowly, tasting the food. My blood pressure never had a problem again. And look how interesting. When we slow down, it seems like the day gets longer. Before, I was always complaining that I didn't have time for anything. Now I have time to read my newspaper in the morning, do crossword puzzles after lunch, and still have time for a little chat with the neighbors in the late afternoon. Some people ask me, "But Mr. Jack, what about the important things?" My dears, it was by living slowly that I learned what's really important. It's important to have time to listen to my grandson's story about his day at school. It's important to be able to bake a cake when my daughter comes to visit. It's important to be able to stop to help Mrs. Sarah when she needs a ride to the doctor. One thing I discovered is that technology can be our friend in this more peaceful life. For example, I use my cell phone to schedule appointments through the app. I don't need to wake up early to wait in line at the clinic anymore, but I also learned to turn off notifications during lunch and after 8 at night. As my daughter says, "Dad, WhatsApp isn't a carrier pigeon. You don't need to respond right away." You know what else changed? Sunday. Before, it was a day to go to the mall, stay in that hustle and bustle. Now, I wake up without hurry, make a nice coffee, read a good book on the porch. In the afternoon, I receive visitors or go visit friends. It's delightful to see how people are surprised when they're invited for a real afternoon tea, without rush. A story I love to tell is about my tea collection. I started it after I retired. Each tea has its right time: chamomile to relax, peppermint for after lunch, lemongrass when I have visitors. It's a simple ritual, but it brings me so much joy. And the best part, when someone comes to visit me, they always bring a new herb for me to try. And you know what's the best part of living slowly? We can notice the small joys, the smell of wet earth after the rain, the first bud of the rosebush I planted, the smile of the bakery girl. It's these little things that make life worth living. Chapter 5. Finding Happiness in Small Moments. Oh, my dears, today I'm going to talk about something that took me 70 years to fully understand: how happiness is hidden in the simplest things in life. You know, when I was younger, I thought happiness was winning the lottery or taking a big international trip. Today, my greatest treasure is waking up early and having coffee on my porch, listening to the day begin. Let me tell you a story that changed my way of seeing things. A few years ago, I was saving money to buy a huge modern TV. But then my 5-year-old granddaughter started coming every Saturday morning to make cookies with me. You know what happened? I completely forgot about the TV. The joy of seeing her all covered in flour, learning her great-grandmother's recipes, is priceless. Every day I discover a new little happiness. Just yesterday I was watering my plants when I saw that my basil plant, which I thought had died in the winter, sprouted again. I was so happy that I immediately called Mrs. Teresa, my neighbor, who also loves plants. We spent almost an hour talking about gardening, exchanging tips and seeds. One thing that makes me very happy is my breakfast ritual. I have a special cup, one of those really old ones that belonged to my mother. Every day I prepare my freshly brewed coffee, get a little piece of cake, when there is some, and sit on the porch. Sometimes the neighbor's cat comes to keep me company. Isn't it wonderful? The other day my son came all worried. "Dad, don't you want to take a trip? See new places?" You know what I answered? That my biggest trip is going every Thursday to play dominoes with my friends at the community center. We laugh, tell stories, share concerns. And there's always that coffee with cookies that Mrs. Judith brings. It's so good that we don't even notice the time passing. And the small victories, how special they are. Last week I managed to make homemade bread for the first time. It was a bit lopsided, but the smell that spread through the house. My grandchildren said it was the best bread in the world. There's also that joy of being able to do crossword puzzles without help, or when I get that old recipe right that my grandmother used to make. One of my greatest happinesses is when it rains. You know why? Because there's always a grandchild who calls, Grandpa, is it raining there too? And we keep talking, listening to the little sound of the rain together, even if it's over the phone. It's moments like these that make my heart warm. I also discovered that happiness is being able to help others. Every Monday I teach a little math to the neighbor's son. He has difficulty in school, and I was a teacher before I retired. Seeing his little eyes light up when he understands something new, that's true happiness. And is there anything better than a good conversation? The other day, I was at the bank waiting to be served, and I started talking to a lady. We discovered that our families came from the same small town. We spent so much time talking that when we realized the line had ended, we even became friends. You know what else makes me happy? Seeing my little garden grow. I started with some tomato seeds. Today I have mint, basil, even strawberries. It doesn't produce much, but when I make tea with the mint I planted myself, it tastes like achievement. A funny thing I discovered is that the more we notice the small joys, the more they appear. It's as if life were a collection of special moments. We just need to pay attention to them. As my granddaughter says, Grandpa, you're an expert at being happy with little. Chapter 6. Resisting Consumer Temptations. My dears, today I'm going to tell you how I learned to resist that crazy urge to buy things that deep down we don't really need that much. You know, even at this age, I sometimes find myself almost falling into these consumer traps. Let me tell you a story that happened to me the other day. I was watching television when an advertisement came on for one of those electric cookers that does everything: rice, beans, soup, even cake. I was instantly enchanted. Wow, how wonderful, I thought. I was about to pick up the phone to buy it when I remembered my old pressure cooker, which belonged to my wife. You know what? It does all those things too. And it even has the scent of memories of her cooking. One thing that helps me a lot is that old trick my mother taught me. Before buying, wait 3 days. If after that time I still want it, then I think about it more carefully. It works like a charm. Most of the time, the urge passes before the 3 days are up. The other day, my granddaughter taught me how to uninstall those shopping apps from my phone. Grandpa, it's too much temptation, she said. And you know what? She was right. Messages were constantly coming in. Unmissable offer. Last chance. Today only. Now I sleep more peacefully without that anxiety of feeling like I'm missing out on some promotion. I remember one time I went to the mall with my son. Oh my, so much glitter, so many pretty things. There was an electronics store with a huge television in the window. My son even offered, "Dad, want me to get you one of those as a gift?" You know what I answered? "Son, I'd prefer if you came to visit me more often so we can watch the old little TV I have together." One thing I've discovered is that when we're bored or a bit sad, there's a strong urge to buy something. It's like a little remedy to cheer up the day. But you know what works better? Calling a friend, taking a walk in the park, baking a cake, and at the end of the month we even save a little money. There's also that story about my neighbor, Mr. Peter. Every month he would buy a new tool for his workshop. Once I asked, "Mr. Peter, do you use all of that?" He laughed and confessed that half of the things were still in their boxes. Now we've agreed to lend tools to each other. We save money and still have an excuse to chat. A technique I've developed is to make shopping lists and stick to them. When I go to the supermarket, I take my little list and don't stray from it. Of course, sometimes that chocolate on sale calls out to me, but then I think, do I really need it? Wouldn't it be better to save this money to buy fruits at the Sunday market? And those online promotions? My, how tempting they are. But I've learned to ask myself, if it wasn't on sale, would I buy it? Most of the time the answer is no. As my grandmother used to say, cheap becomes expensive when we buy what we don't need. An interesting thing I've noticed is that the fewer advertisements we see, the less we want to buy. Now when commercials are on TV, I take the opportunity to do some stretching, take a little walk around the house, water the plants. It's good for the body and the wallet. The funniest thing is that after I started resisting consumer temptations, I discovered I have more money to do what really matters. Just last month, instead of buying that electric cooker, I used the money to make a special lunch for my daughter's birthday. The joy of seeing the whole family together is worth much more than any new appliance. Chapter 7. Filling Life with Meaning. My dears, today I want to talk about how I found meaning in life after I stopped chasing material things. You know, when I retired, I thought I'd have nothing to do, but I discovered that life can be much richer when we make room for what really matters. I'll tell you a story that changed my life. Soon after I retired, I was a bit lost, not knowing what to do with so much free time. One day I found some old photos and started writing down the stories behind each one. My granddaughter saw this and said, "Grandpa, why don't you write a memoir?" And that's how my new hobby began. Now I have 3 notebooks full of family stories. There's also my community garden. I started with a few seedlings on the sidewalk in front of my house, and before I knew it, the neighbors started bringing more plants. Today we have a beautiful flower bed on the street, where everyone takes care of it together. Mrs. Mary brings the seeds. Mr. John waters in the morning. I look after it in the evening. And the best part, it's become a meeting point for the neighborhood. One of the most rewarding things I do is teach children to play chess at the community center. I started because I saw the chessboard stored there, gathering dust. Today, I have 6 regular students. Seeing those little heads thinking, developing strategies, it's a joy that no money can buy. Another discovery was the storytelling group we formed. Every Wednesday, we meet at the neighborhood library. Each person tells a story. Sometimes they're old tales, sometimes they're stories from our own lives. Some days we laugh so much that the librarian has to ask for silence. Laughs. You know what enchants me the most? Seeing how simple things can bring so much happiness. For example, every Saturday I make cookies using my grandmother's recipe. The smell that spreads through the house brings back so many good memories, and I always make a little extra to take to the neighbors. Mrs. Teresa has even asked me for the recipe. One thing that gives me a lot of pride is the reading club I formed with other retirees. It started with 3 people reading the same book to have something to talk about. Today, we are 12. The municipal library even lent us a space for the meetings. Last week, we discussed a poetry book, and Mr. Frank, who was a bricklayer, surprised us by reciting a poem by heart. And there's my most recent project. I'm learning to play the guitar. My grandson is teaching me over the computer. These video calls are wonderful, you know? Of course, my fingers aren't as agile anymore, but the joy of being able to play an entire song, it's priceless. One of the greatest joys is being able to spend time with family without that rush from the old days. Now when my children and grandchildren come for Sunday lunch, I'm not worried about the expensive dishes or if the tablecloth is fashionable. The important thing is being together, talking, laughing. I also discovered the joy of volunteering. Once a week I go to read stories at the nursing home nearby. There's a lady there, Mrs. Amelia, who always cries when I read love poems. She says it reminds her of her late husband. You know, that moment with them is one of the most special of my week. And the craft classes. I started making picture frames out of popsicle sticks with my granddaughter. Now I make such beautiful pieces. I even sold some at the church fair. But the best part isn't the money. It's seeing people's joy when they find something made with love. What I've learned is that when we stop chasing material things, space opens up to discover talents we didn't even know we had. As my daughter says, "Dad, you're busier now than when you were working." And it's true, but it's an occupation that fills the heart with joy. My dear friends who have followed all these stories and reflections of an old man who has learned a lot from life, we've come to the end of our conversation. But before I say goodbye, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for staying here with me, listening to my stories and experiences. You know, each of your comments is like receiving a special visit on my porch, the kind where we serve fresh coffee and homemade cookies. So make this old man happy. Leave in the comments what touched your heart the most, which story brought back a good memory, or which advice you intend to follow. And if you enjoyed these porch talks, don't forget to leave your like. It's like a virtual hug that warms my heart. Oh, and hit that bell and subscribe to the channel. That way you won't miss any of our next conversations. Who knows, maybe next time I'll tell you about my grandchildren's mischief or teach you that secret cornbread recipe from Grandma. As my grandmother used to say, life is like a guitar circle. The more people singing together, the more beautiful the music becomes. So shall we make this channel our little guitar circle? Invite your friends, your family. Share it with that neighbor who also enjoys a good chat. And remember, happiness isn't in the things we have, but in the moments we live and the people with whom we share our journey. Like this special moment we've lived together here. Now I'll say goodbye, but first, how about one last virtual coffee? And don't forget, like the video, comment telling what you liked the most, subscribe to the channel, share with those you love. A warm hug from this grandpa who's already missing all of you. Until the next video. P.S. As my granddaughter says, Grandpa, Instagram stories too.